You will recall that when we looked at the COVID database in Tableau, we calculated the moving average. And we're going to do the same in Power BI using DAX. You will also recall, well, the first thing to point out is that you can add, there are a number of, call them embedded calculations, DAX expressions, called quick measures. And one of them is rolling average. So you might think that we can use rolling average to calculate the moving average that we wanted. The problem with this is that rolling average will require that you use the date hierarchy that Power BI created on the event date. And we know that if we use that hierarchy, we can't map the number of cases for every single date, individual date that we have data for. So we're going to have to do this slightly differently. We're going to have to use DAX. The second point is that you will recall that when we did all this in Power BI, we used the parameter to change the size of the moving window. We're going to use a slicer in Power BI to achieve the same effect. But before we do so, the first thing I'm going to want to do is create a table that maps the description of the period to the number of days. So I'm going to select Enter Data from the Home ribbon. That brings up the Create Table window, and I'm going to use period, and then it's daily, 5-day, weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly. And I need a second column, number of days. That maps these period descriptions to numbers. And I'm going to call this table periods. We'll load this, and then eventually we will see the table appear on the right. Okay, so here it is. And now I can add a slicer to my visualization, and I will take period and put that in the slicer. And now what I'm going to do is tidy it up a little bit so we see what's going on. As we did for the county slicer, we'll set the size for the items to 14. And we'll set the size of the slicer header to 18. And now you see we have a slight problem in the slicer. The issue is that the Power BI has decided to order the items in the slicer alphabetically rather than by the number of days. So we need to fix that. So I'm going to click on the data icon. And if it's not already selected, then I'm select periods to bring up the periods table. Now click on period and bring up column tools. And now what you can do is sort by column. So we're going to sort period by number of days. Now, nothing appears to be happening, except that when we now go back to the visualization, you see that they now appear in the correct order. Second thing we're going to do is now use the value of this slicer to calculate the moving window, the moving window size. So again, we're going to create a new measure. We're going to name that measure moving window. And as we did before, if has one value, and now obviously we're going to go to periods, period, that has one value, then we return the values in the corresponding row, number of days, And if it doesn't have one value because we haven't filtered it yet, then we just set it to 5. And that seems to be working fine. Now, the next thing we now need to do is create the actual moving average. And that's a slightly more complicated operation. So again, I'm going to add a new measure, and I'm going to call that measure moving average. We'll use the DAX function calculate to calculate it. And as you see, calculate evaluates an expression in a context modified by filters. Well, the expression we want to calculate is relatively straightforward because we want to count the number of cases over a given period. The second part is a little more complicated because we're now going to use the dates in period function, DAX function. That requires a date, a start date, the number of intervals, and then the interval, and we'll see what that's going to do. So what we're going to do then is we start with the date, obviously, and then we want to start at the first date that we have data for. And fortunately, DAX has the first dates function available to us. Again, we stick event date in there. Now, the number of intervals we want is obviously determined by the moving window. And then, well, we want day, right? The interval should be day. And that seems to be working, except that we now have to still divide this by the not moving window. And now you see we have the moving average here as well. And I can drag the moving average into the visualization. Let me remove the count of object ID to show you better what's going on. So now we're only mapping the moving average. And you see that if I select daily here, I get the daily number of cases, but I can smooth it out over the 5-day period, over a weekly period, over a bi-weekly period, or even over a monthly period. And because my first slicer is still active, I can do this just for Hillsborough, or just for Pasco, or again, I can clear the selection so I get everything. And then here, if I clear the selection, then you'll see I get the same as the 5-day average. So that is the way in which you calculate a moving average in DAX.